Hi, everybody. This is Miranda again with Unraveled podcast. Today we have a very special guest that I'll introduce in a minute, but I do want to mention Anarchopulco as they are the first sponsor of this podcast. Anarchopulco is it's where I work, it's where my community is, it's where I found my partner, and it really, in my opinion, is the best place event really to meet people of your tribe, to actually network and get to know people. Yes, it's about speeches, but in my opinion, it's always been this way. The speeches at Anarchopulco you can find on YouTube, but what you can't find is the ability to sit there and hang out with people that you look up to and to connect with people that you didn't or couldn't know have existed before. Um, if you want to save 10% on most tickets, use code Lily10. And I'm going to use this to segue into my guest today because my guest is somebody that I know through the Anarchopulco community, and he has become a very important part of my world this year. And I might really mispronounce your last name. So sorry in advance, but this is Greg Papanicolas, I think.
Papanicolas. You were close.
Papanicolas. Okay, anyway, he is one of a few, I guess, private internet trainers. You also have in-person clients, but from when I went to do research into who I was going to work with and having had a conversation with you many years before I actually got my shit together to do it, um, the reason I went with Greg is because he has a long track record of understanding how to actually work with women in a way that's successful. So, Greg, thank you for being here despite all of the technology issues that we've had to get here. And I just want to start by asking, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. The sun is shining. I'm in an area that I love, moved away from the city. So I can't be any more happy than I am now, especially with just the change in scenery a couple years ago. So every day is amazing. So today is no different.
What led you out of the city? Because me personally, I like cities, but what led you out of it?
Um, Being around DC for so long, I was sort of I would say a country boy at heart. I know that sounds kind of cliche when you were born near the city and or the suburbs in a way, because I'm right outside DC. But where I grew up, I never felt I fit in with that. It was a very private school culture, and other than a private school culture, it just didn't feel as though it was going to be the place I stayed. And every time I went up to the farm, the family farm, I felt at home. So there had to be some kind of reason I felt better there than I did there when I was living in the city. And when I decided to come out here, pace slowed down, the people were nicer, the traffic was less, and you really see the value of a relationship out here more because people tend to get away for almost the same reason. So you find common ground with those people. So when I left, I was like, this is perfect. I'm going to be in an open area where the dogs can run and I can feel more at home and do the things I want to do recreationally that I couldn't do back home and raise my son differently, you know?
Right, right. Yeah, that makes total sense. And yeah, somebody like when you were talking about that was actually reminding me of, for me, my version of that is the United States versus Mexico. Because like I even asked my dad, I was like, Dad, are you surprised I live in Mexico? And he was like, absolutely not. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you were 5 years old trying to convince me to leave the country because we didn't like the politics. Like, and I was trying to convince him to go to Canada. I didn't know any better, right? But yeah, and that's kind of how I felt as soon as I got to Mexico was, you can exhale. There's more financial freedom to be able to just do the stuff that's important to you. Like I was thinking last night before I went to bed, if I was living in the US, I would not have the time to train the way that I have with the amount of work that I do. It would be completely impossible. So I'm super thankful for that. So I first became aware of you because you were coming to Anarchopulco in, I would say, the pre, because Anarchopulco kind of got like reborn in 2020 when we took it over, but you were in, I know for sure 2019, if I remember correctly, because I remember seeing posts of you in your tiny little tank top going to
Yeah.
gyms
Yeah.
in not the best part of town, but I remember having respect because the majority of the people that came for Anarchopulco in those days, they didn't leave the princess, and
Yeah.
you were there sweating your ass off in the gym. So I wanted to ask you a little bit, like, what was your experience with Anarchopulco and with Acapulco at that time?
Yeah. And again, like when you talk about the differences, they were stark when I got down there. I remember when I arrived thinking, okay, this is what sort of like I talk a lot about Gen X and how to just think on the fly, right? And having to make shit up as you go along. And I'm like, well, hey, I got to figure out where I'm going to find a gym, where I'm going to eat. Because again, at the time, the princess had the vegan, restaurants. And I was thinking, where do I find meat? So there was that. There were the factors that were important when arriving of, okay, how am I going to structure the solo time? Because I knew I was going to be able to see everybody, right? But then when I got there, how was I going to blend in? And when I arrived, it was sort of it was a little bit of shock just because I had never really been out of the country, sort of a homebody. Anytime I would go places, it would just be like Alaska, places that were still within the states. But uh, adjusting to having to think on the fly, speaking the language, and thinking about the things that aren't necessarily the spoken barriers, right? Your energy, like how you show up, right? I walk in, with muscles like this. It's like I have to be engaging and I have to be kind because people are just going to either fight me or run away in that kind of case. Or I'm like, let me just make sure that I'm coming with that type of energy where it's engaging and I'm open and I'm thankful to be here, which I was anyway. But once I got going, found the gym, had to be escorted out there. And the guy that dropped me off, the cab driver, stayed with me basically on the outside, sat, on a park bench, waited for me to finish. Had to have a little bit of schooling in, where I was, because again, you were saying that wasn't you have an opportunity to really educate me on where I was, because I certainly didn't know how different villages were, how different towns were. So I was just going based off my own instincts and thinking, okay, I got to be as unassuming as possible. But when you're a gringo and you're wearing a tank, it you stick out like a sore thumb. But the benefit of being a, being a little bit being a little bit on the more Mediterranean side, I was able to kind of not put the spotlight on me so much,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
and and sort of get away with it. And then through that, I was able to put in a pretty good workout at a kind of a it was a kind of a hole in the wall place, but that's the kind of place that I like. Ultimately, that's it was comforting actually being there, which is strange. Uh, and then of course the experience at in and around the Princess was more just kind of walking around, seeing what was around the stores. But I couldn't stay out there for very long because again, I didn't want to waste this guy's time who was kind enough to stay with me uh, after he had dropped me off. I'm sure you could educate me on why he had to stay with me.
well, I mean, the thing with Acapulco, and I mean, this is really true with most cities in Mexico, is you could be on one road and it's totally safe, and then one road over, people are going to look at you, especially as a foreigner. But the other thing that I've learned, and he's definitely protective, but something I've kind of learned is even in some of the shadier parts, I guess, of Mexico. Like I've been to Tepito in Mexico City, for example, where you could buy literally anything. And I mean anything, right? I just went there just to see what it was like, right? I saw baby tigers for sale and stuff, right? And I've been in the metro in Mexico City, which is the subway system and stuff. And the fun thing is, because me, I don't have any hope of ever blending in here. Like you can pass as a Mexican if you spoke really good Spanish, but me, absolutely not. But one thing I found, and this is a conversation I've had with my boyfriend, because he will not go in the metro in Mexico City because he's like, we're gonna get robbed. I've been in the metro many times. I've been in the metro with everything I owned on my back, moving to where I live now. Um, and I think the reason why I wasn't harassed is people were just so stunned I was there, and that I wasn't like terrified. I was just there, like vibing, that they kept their distance and they left me alone. And I kind of feel the same way about the gym that I'm at now. It is not the fancy gym that they expect the white girls that come to visit to go to. It's like kind of a dirty, local gym. And I have yet to have anybody try to talk to me there because they're just so confused. They're like, is she lost? She's not. She's lifting, and in some cases, I'm lifting more than the men. But um, they're just confused. And yeah, but especially in Acapulco, there are certain parts like an area called Caleta, which is not where you were. You were more in the Diamante zone. There's just a lot of poor people there. And if you're the
Yeah.
type of gringo to flash your money and to flash your wealth, you will get robbed, right? But if you're just a gringo that's there that clearly isn't trying to do that, most of the time you're going to be okay. You had a good friend as a taxi driver, but probably you would be okay. Most likely, in my opinion. But yeah, I had a lot of respect because yeah, it's the thing where the majority of people that used to come for Anarchopulco, and this was different when I first got there. When I first got there, it was 2016, and this was in the other side of the bay, and we had this big hotel. And then as soon as the conference would end, people would just go out and go into the city. Um, but the princess, as you remember, was so isolated, and so you had to walk really far. And then when you got to the main road, it was ugly, and it's like, where do I even go, right? So people would just stay there, and it was kind of, I mean, that's really why I created the Forgo, was to get people back out into the city. So yeah, yeah, I'm glad that we talked about it. So for those who don't know, can you remind me of the specific business name that you have?
Yeah. So I go by Project Sparta as the umbrella.
Okay.
And that's essentially what's underneath that is essentially the different moving parts of each person I serve. So you know, Sparta code is more for men, and it's more cerebral and psychological and a little bit more therapeutic and with some fitness in there. Um, and the overarching idea is, trying to maximize your level of health, but minimize your time pursuing it. So you're not spending 2 or 3 hours doing that thing during the day. Like a lot of people used to think more is better. So I try to hone in on uh, maximizing your strength, maximizing your health while minimizing your time in the gym, while also making sure that you eat enough. Because again, the factors are that we were raised to eat less and less and less. And my idea is to come around with a lot of people that have already come around to it, which is to eat to fuel your body for that particular activity, and it's necessary. I think the biggest example of that we saw years and years ago was finding out how much what was a swimmer guy. Can't remember the Olympic swimmer, but he had like 7,000 calories a day, and he was this little skinny string bean, but he needed it for the amount of time he was, engaged in whatever activity. So I made sure the Project Sparta focused on more is better in some regards, but less is better in others, to make that more of a principle and a philosophy that I try to hone in on and have people follow.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things in there I want to unpack. The first thing I want to touch on is you mentioned that swimmer, and I heard an interesting statistic recently. Basically, they did some testing on like grandmaster chess players to see how much they burn during a tournament. And they're literally just sitting there thinking. and moving pieces, right? And they're burning thousands and thousands of calories just sitting there. And I mean, and I've played chess with my partner. He's way better than I am. He's trying to become a master. I am not. And I've sat there just sweating. So I know that there's something to it. It's not something people think about. Um, the calories thing is interesting because I have this debate with a friend of mine because she's like, you are not an incinerator oven because all of these studies on how many calories foods contain, like, she says it doesn't line up with reality, but it does to an extent, but it's not quite in the way that people think, right? Have you heard of that whole idea of like we shouldn't pay attention to calories because we're not incinerators?
Yeah, and I've heard that theory. My whole idea behind the calorie thing is because it's use of energy, it has to be important. And they're finding more and more through more studies, and I can send a bunch to you after this, and we can even post them later, that calories are they are the mechanism for building muscle more so than protein.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's something to that. There's studies that show you after a certain point with protein, the body just like it can't do anything with that. So if you're eating 300 grams of protein a day, 250, like is your body really processing that?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
They're
that's
synthesizing
a
it. Yeah.
whole thing in
Yeah.
itself.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that synthesizing. It's whether or not it's actually working for you. Some people are eating it and it's like you said, they're not processing it. And digestion is another factor, how your liver functions with it, how your kidneys function with it. Is your body going to accept it the way that other people have accepted, their intake? And sometimes for one person, it's, an ungodly amount and they're a little tiny thing. And sometimes it's a 400-pound man who pushes cars and he needs, you know, that same amount or whatever, just depending on what they're engaged in. Women in bodybuilding are eating upwards of 250 when they're 150 pounds, right? Um, and it all depends on, like I said, your goal. So for me, my goal after quitting competitive lifting and all that and doing the things that I used to do, it was now I'm doing it because I want to, for satiation. I want to make sure that I'm uh, not as hungry all the time. So I do it just to fulfill that because I know that you know, I built this physique the way I wanted it to. Now it's a matter of health for me. So I no longer focus on the things. And I know that you and I have talked about it. Like, yes, it's a primary thing. Protein is primary, but we can't put it up on a pedestal as if it is the be all end all. It's important, but it's just a piece, right? It's just a piece of it. And when people are completely canceling out and doing away with some other macros entirely, I think that becomes more of a problem for your micronutrient intake than it does your macro. You know, it puts you in a state of not of starvation, but in a lacking uh, uh, focus that you're not getting the amount of nutrients that you need from that particular extreme diet or another. I've always advocated to be wide ranging. You know,
Yeah. You've always helped me with that from afar because I mean, I was randomly picking your brain on certain things years before I was able to really, I don't know if subscribe is the word, but really take part in like your whole system, right? Um, and as you know, I was carnivore for a long time and I thought I couldn't eat other things. Turns out I just had to quit weed to be able to eat other things, like my pancreas was not producing things. There's a lot of studies that prove that um, chronic weed use leads to lower, pancreas function. And if your pancreas isn't functioning, you can't digest food, right? And that's a thing, that's a big part of what's really surprised me about this whole process with you is I was also working with that health coach sort of thing, Christian Yordanov, which I've done an interview with him recently about. that sort of stuff. But he gave me an outline, which was like 120 grams of protein a day, and then the rest in carbs, more or less, and like less than 60 grams of fat. And that's against completely everything that I was taught with the carnivore diet. And lo and behold, it's where I started to have some progress, because I tried to do carnivore last year and I got down to about the weight that I am now. But as soon as I would do anything outside of it, I just balloon, and then I'd balloon more, and it really does impact the metabolism. And I'm curious as to your thoughts on the whole carnivore thing in particular, and as far as training, like how does that work? Because a lot of them claim, yeah, no, I can, you have the Sean Bakers, who
Yeah.
I think he's actually an anomaly. Like, what are your thoughts on that whole thing in terms of carnivore plus training?
Yeah. So knowing from my own training and helping people in the past and seeing other people in major positions of authority and influence who are generally doing different things with their lives, depending on the activity, whatever it is. Somebody like a Sean Baker who is rowing is doing something that is a long, steady state activity that doesn't require the glycogen that a sprinter would require or a power lifter would require, because that stuff is very speed velocity oriented versus the thing that's a very slow, over and over, steady state, methodical, repetitive activity like rowing. So high fat works for that because it's sustainable. You don't have the ups and downs during that training with your insulin in the way that you would if you were doing high carb or just high sugar in general, right? Um, so with something like a sprinter, with something like a power lifter, with somebody who is doing burst of speed or burst of energy output, something like that requires a lot of that, tends to want to favor the little bit higher carb based nutrition because of what that accomplishes within that activity. So Sean's probably going to do that for the rest of his life because rowing tends to be his staple. He still lifts, right? You can use other means to supplement if you're not carbing up, which just means higher fat. And he could probably, you know, eat a bunch of sodium, and that really, helps with a lot of the hydrational needs, right? But in the long run, for people who are more the people that lean a little bit more towards the fast twitch movements, the speed, the acceleration, even the stuff you're doing with the aerial requires that sort of jerky movement that almost like it's almost like you benefit better from something that's fulfilling and higher carbs because you know you're going to get a little bit more oomph. It's just a thing. Like it's an oomph that you don't feel when you're on carnivore. And when I tried to do that during powerlifting, it was miserable and I could not lift. I was tired. Um, and I was 2 years into carnivore during 2014, 2015 time period. And it didn't last because I didn't have the oomph to my lifts. I lost speed on the lifts. I lost velocity. And so I always favored whatever sport you were looking to engage in. That could also determine what nutrition you favor or your body is going to favor.
Yeah, that's something I've noticed too with myself is even, and as you were talking, I was thinking back to my experiences last year on the carnivore diet. And like, at first I was like, okay, I feel lighter. I felt physically lighter, right? I had lost a little bit of weight, but you're right in that I didn't have the same power. Um, because there really does involve that impulse, especially when you're doing the straight arm, straight leg inverts that we were working on the whole time I've been working with you. That takes an impulse that I was simply just not able to do before. Like I would try and I had to have my arms bent or my legs bent and that was it, right? Um, there is something really to that. And there's also that like drive of it, and that carnivore is socially so hard to stick to, and then when you're also lacking power in the gym, like it makes it it makes it really difficult to stick to it long term. I personally believe, like, unless you're like a Michaela Peterson, like Jordan Peterson's daughter, I think that's her name. Um, Unless you're like her and you literally cannot function with these foods in your body, really what you need to do is find a way to get like the rest of you healthy, you know? For me, my big thing was hormones. And that was a big part of why I wanted to work with you, is because I was seeing the before and after of women older than me. And I know as it gets older, as you get older, it gets harder as a woman. But I had, as you remember, I had basically just stopped training altogether because I was in constant pain. And I started a bunch of supplements at the same time, and all but one of those supplements, and there were more than a dozen of them, all but more than those supplements did not last for one reason or another. But something I found is, and I had heard this before, but I didn't expect it, but I would say through having a sustained lifting thing, because that's the main difference from before to now, is that because I've always eaten kind of high protein, is that I'm lifting weights and doing HIIT and the other stuff that you assign me, and now all of a sudden I only have the pain that I was having every single day of the month from endometriosis. I'm only having that during my cycle for 1 to 2 days, and then I'm back. You know. Um, do you know why lifting helps hormones? Like, what's the chemical thing happening there for women? Because it seems to be a thing, especially with women with endometriosis and PCOS, that once they start lifting, their inflammation goes down, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because I'm sore a lot. Like, I'm sore right now from yesterday. I'm just like, damn. But my inflammation is completely different. Like, why is that?
It's interesting because they're never. It's tough to make an association with all the different moving parts as to why that is the case for endometriosis. Like that we don't we won't know. We would have to look into several studies about women who have had it and still have it and have transitioned into that type of training. What I know is that in the time that I've been involved in people that I've helped, every time we've done free weights, every time we've done things with a particular load, especially when it's above what is your 5 out of 10, which would be, you know, plenty of reps left in the tank. But if you're training at a 7 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10, your 70 or 80% is doing something different to your male hormones and your female hormones at the same time. There's like a self-correction that happens. It's almost like it's a scale thing that happens when you do that, where things start to move in another direction positively for you. So, and this is kind of hilarious, but every person that I've talked to that started doing it after they've stopped for a long time, when they're training for a couple of months, they're like, my libido is changing. It's like I'm driven to have more sex with my significant other because I'm lifting more. I'm like, there's got to be a thing with hormones there where that starts to click on for you too, because anybody who's sitting at home not doing a thing is inactive it's going to have the opposite effect, right? The body is in resting motion or resting phase the whole time and not in motion. So it has to turn on both estrogen and testosterone in a way that sort of balances you out a little more. That's the only thing I can kind of associate that with without going into the minutia of how the chemicals, interchange inside your body. But I know that it changes hormonally for women and men on a sliding scale when you do more of it.
That's interesting. I know that endometriosis is often thought of as a excess of estrogen, but I also know that like when I had my estrogen tested when I first got diagnosed, my estrogen wasn't actually that high. Um, but it would make sense that if the testosterone is rising in my body to level that, I'm going to have less of those inflammatory responses, because like I'm training now more than I ever have, like 5 days a week, and even right now more, obviously much more than when we started. And you would think that I would have a lot of inflammation, and no, my muscles are sore, but it's that like I did a good job on my workout sore, not I have brain fog and chronic fatigue and that sort of thing, you know?
And there's particular foods that kind of feed into that, because I know you and I talked about it, how, the bad carbs were a factor in a lot of people having those mornings where they would start to do their training and they would eat poorly. And the next day they'd wake up feeling like they couldn't move. I mean, it's this buildup of it's a buildup of inflammation and joint problems from the foods that kind of, negatively affect those things. So the inflammatory things like, pancakes and things like that, or cookies, are going to have more of a negative effect on you than something that is really, really good for, the joints that has collagen in it, or any kind of vegetable that's going to help you with, managing those symptoms, and even the starches, right? The sweet potatoes and the green and red, yellow peppers, the things that have such a high punch with micronutrient value, but also reduce those things. They're I can just call them power starches, because they're the things that I can eat in small doses that give me the best, you know, bang for my buck, essentially.
Yeah, on the sweet potatoes thing, and I wouldn't say I eat them in small doses because I love, but I did find that because like I couldn't really digest them that well before, but I started and I showed you the photo when I first started doing this. But I learned online that when you roast sweet potatoes and then you let them cool and then you put them in the fridge, and apparently after 8 hours in the fridge, a lot of those starches get turned to resistant starch. And all of a sudden, I was able to digest them. I started losing more weight. And it also kind of feels like you're eating candy for breakfast, which is really, really fucking nice. And it's kind of changed how I eat, which I noticed yesterday. I came home from the gym and I had two fat golden kiwis and like four apricot plums, those like apricot plum combinations, and like some peaches, and I was just like eating it like it was crack. But I was thinking back to me as a kid, like I didn't really enjoy fruit, you know? So it's interesting how your tastes change with these sort of things. And that kind of leads me into my next question, which is there are a lot of people out there, a lot of these like fitness influencers that say it doesn't matter what you eat as long as you hit your protein and stay within your calorie goal. Um, I'm curious as to what your thoughts on that. My experience, as much as I hate to admit it, is I noticed a distinct difference in both my power and the scale when I'm still staying in the calorie goal, but eating like Doritos instead of like rice cakes and peanut butter, you know? So like, what are your thoughts on that?
I honestly, I think those types of fitness influencers are more effectively gunning towards the people that still love to taste something great on their palate, and they don't want to get rid of the foods that they really enjoy for fun. Like it's one of those things where people are like, "Well, I can't get rid of, tater tots because I grew up on it." Right? it's like it's like some people have a love for it that goes beyond, what we normally would cast as normal. But I guess for the most part, I think that type of marketing is for the people that like to have a lot of wiggle room in their nutrition, and that's fine, right? I always say, like, if you want to make a memory with your boyfriend or girlfriend or spouse or child and go out for that ice cream, it's fine. You know, you have to leave room for the things to enjoy. It's just as long as it's in some bit of moderation where you're not going overboard with it. And I think that gives most nutritional protocols a little more wiggle room. And I've always felt I've done enough of that for people where it's a cheat day becomes or a cheat meal becomes the thing that they grew up on, or the thing they've always loved that still reminds them of the past, or that they've always enjoyed. and don't remove it from them unless they are controlled by it. So if they're controlled by it, that's a completely other factor that you have to dig deep down into psychologically with them to figure out how to manage that, because that's a totally different space. I think the foods in large amounts that are, not necessarily the best for you are going to cause those issues later on. Um, you know, Either with liver issues, with heart issues, depending on how much you're eating with fried foods and overly prepared, the seed oils, um, like I said, the deep fried things, the things that you would find at a fast food restaurant. But if you're having that 1 to 2 times a month, it's not going to have the same effect if somebody's eating it twice a week, 3 times a week. And I always feel like if you know how to manage that, if you learn how to manage that part of it, and if your nutrition protocol is too boring for you, there is a way to structure it where you feel like you're getting enough of those prizes. You're getting enough of those, rewards at the end where you're like, I can have this protein ice cream that they label protein now. So it sounds better. And in order to finally get to a point where you feel like you're getting what you need psychologically out of the enjoyment, of nutrition.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said with the intuitive eating thing because me, I've kind of had all the extremes, right? Like I did vegetarian for a while and then I did carnivore. And the thing I found with carnivore was every time I would like have just a little something off of it, it would be a binge till I'm sick situation. And for me, that goes back to my childhood. I had a lot of issues with malnutrition. My mom wasn't feeding us enough. So when I feel like I'm lacking something and I'm not allowed to have something, when I do have it, I go crazy, right? Um, for me, in the last like 6 months working with you, I have found that yeah, it doesn't really affect too much if I go when I'm on my cycle and eat a Krispy Kreme donut or two and then
Yep.
continue about my thing. And there's less of that food noise, which is interesting because a lot of these carnivores, they're like, oh, when I went carnivore, the food noise stopped and my carb cravings, mine never went away. Mine never stopped. If anything, I obsessed more of my day on what I was eating and defending, the carnivore diet. And okay, I do this because it's healthy, not because I need to. Whereas now, like you would think, and my friend, she asked me about this a lot. She's like, well, do you think, the carb noise and the food noise and all that? And it's like, I don't really feel the need to binge at this point. I can have like a handful of Doritos and that just be it because I know that it's not going to be 6 months to a year before I allow myself to do something like that again, right? And that right there, um, when you're on a journey for health and fitness and all of these things, what we need is sustainability. And that's the thing that I found refreshing about you. You mentioned earlier that you're not trying to have people in the gym for hours a day. And like, I don't think that's something I even understood until I started because you remember I was like, oh, I'm not ready. I need more time. I'm dealing with a lot right now. I need more time. But then when I actually started it and you started scheduling me workouts, I'm like, 37 minutes? I don't understand. That's not enough. Like that doesn't make sense, but it does, and it does make a big difference. How did you arrive on that? Because yeah, the majority of the world is, especially for women, eat less, move more, cardio, cardio, cardio. You need to spend 2 hours every day in the gym at 5 in the morning, or else you're a failure. Like, how do you get beyond that to where you are?
Yeah. It's, so what I learned from Mike Mentzer, who was a bodybuilder in the 80s, he was a competitor against Arnold, um, guy that pretty much should have won 1980, but Arnold's politics got him, the win in that competition. So he was kind of forgotten about because, Arnold beat him and he stuck around for a little while, but his whole premise was that we grow on our off days. That's when the actual growth is occurring. Why would we want to reduce the amount of that, the growth, and increase the amount that really only requires, if we're going really, really super hard, how hard can you go for 15 minutes versus an hour? If you knew you only had 15 minutes to get the maximum amount of growth out of your training, you would take the 15 minutes. You wouldn't take the hour. The hour is going to put you in a place where now, if it's a Monday and you spent, let's just say a really long time, let's just say an hour and a half or 2 hours in the gym. Now you're going to have to take at least 3 or 4 days off, not just for your muscles to recover, but for your system itself, your CNS to recover mechanically from all of that training. It's almost like we have to first understand that compensation needs to occur. So the people that go out and they run for hours and hours and hours are not doing it all the time. They're sitting on the couch. The marathon runners have to sit on the couch for the remainder of their day because of the amount of work. Compensation has to occur. So then if compensation has to occur, recovery has to occur with it. So we have to understand the growth mechanism doesn't happen unless we take that time off. And the more time off we take, the better we'll feel coming back the second time to do that workout 3 or 4 days later versus in the 24 hours or even the 48 hours. I think we can get away with doing the same thing 48 hours later if it's a moderate to light workout. But if we're testing, we're constantly pushing and pushing and pushing, laying on that car horn, and then, everything seems like, a crash all the time. And that should be a signal in our head that now we have to balance recovery with how hard we're training. So the harder I trained, the more time I had to take off versus when I was 20, thinking that I had to do it every day, 6 days a week. And it's a philosophy that works for a lot of people, even though some other people do really benefit from that frequency. Some are loving that recovery because they're like, oh, I can recover in a day. And that just depends on the person. The older we get, though, the harder it gets to recover. So the 20-year-old is going to need 24 hours before they could do the same thing and go back and hit really hard workouts right afterwards. But a person in their 40s and 50s is eventually going to have to take that time, especially if they're doing something really strenuous like a heavy deadlift day. Sometimes that takes 2 weeks for a lot of the older generation to recover from because of how much of a taxing that is on the system. So not just localized recovery with your muscle is imperative, but systematic recovery is probably imperative, even more so because you want to be doing the hard stuff and the hard workouts and the strenuous stuff. And your stuff is strenuous too with the aerial. That has to be done in bits and pieces. You wouldn't feel every day like you could do it. You'd probably, pass out every day at 6 o'clock if you knew you were doing hours and hours of it every day. And so now that you're minimizing that, your system is recovering from it and realizing I can't do these really, really heavy, strenuous workouts in between the aerials. I have to do moderate in between the aerials or maybe one heavy day during the week. And then that heavy day is followed by 2 days of recovery. So there's always that cycle of realizing how many days you actually need so that then you get into a rhythm of, well, I need 48 days for that. I need 72 for this. And for the light stuff, I need 24. And it's a whole system that I try to really, really propose to most people that have been locked into that whole idea behind more is better, faster is better, less recovery, balls to the wall. And I think that needed to change. And I'm glad that's becoming something that people are adjusting to and accepting. So
Yeah, you'll remember a few days ago I tagged you in a video, and I tagged you in it because it was funny, but like it was like, oh, a girl talking to herself, she goes to get out of bed and she's like, oh, I'm so tired, I don't want to go to the gym. And it's like, oh, just take a rest day, and she gets back in the bed and it's like, it's okay, they make clothing for bigger people like you, and then she gets out of the bed, right? And that's kind of been my biggest struggle, as you know, with this whole process. It is not sticking to the protein goals or even the calorie goals. It is not like finding the motivation to go to the gym. It's days like last Friday where I wake up and every muscle in my body is sore, and I'm like, but it's Ariel's day. Okay, I guess I won't go. But I have had more power this week, so there is something to it. Rest, in my opinion, is the biggest hurdle. I'm curious as to like with your other clients, how much of it is just reminding them that they need to rest their body and how much of it is actually motivating them to do it. I'm curious about that.
Yeah, that's the hard part. The balance is, especially at the beginning, convincing the individual that they have to, especially at the beginning, because you don't want to burn out so fast. The majority of people that start are always looking to start with a bang. Like they always want to start fast, right? Um, but it's something that has to be built toward. And I remember one of my clients that I scheduled a 15-minute hit, which was, and it was all free weights and it was all heavy. So, and it was a woman in her late 30s. And I said, you have to do 15 to 18 minutes and you're going to do 3 exercises total. And there are only going to be 1 or 2 sets, but you're going to take a break in between, a longer rest in between the sets, but you're going to go all out. Like your life depends on it. It's going to be the heaviest you've ever gone. And obviously I was doing it, when she was in the middle of her part of the cycle that she could, right? I wasn't going to do it during luteal or any of that. I was going to save it for when she could and maximize that time, couple that with, the cardio stuff I was adding to her repertoire. And this was a 6-week blitz because she wanted to be ready for a major event that had to take place. And I said, how are we going to do this in 6 weeks? And it was, here's what we're going to do. So they're like the opposite of how I would start off somebody long term that was working with me long term. But with her, it was, we got 6 weeks. Here's what we're going to do in those 6 weeks. And everything just burned right off of her. And she looked great. It was her wedding day. So like all of that stuff mattered to her, trying to blitz it. And for the fact that you had to do all of that stuff that most people are looking at doing when they first start, which is go balls to the wall. It's like this was a 6-week blitz. This was different. This was something that had to be done. But the fact that she was done and her husband was still going 45 minutes later, she had to wait for him to finish. And she's sitting there going, all right, I guess I'll just chill at the, near the front desk and read a magazine, I'll look at my phone while you're finishing. But two different factors, two different people in different stages of their training. So convincing that person that 15 minutes was enough, hard to do. But once you saw the results from it and realized that all of that time in between the 4 days that you got as a reward in between of rest, it's like you earned that because you went all out for 15 minutes and your system still hasn't recovered after 2 days. So you need that. And she was thankful because again, she got to spend more time with her family and not worried about, oh my God, I'm going to have to, my kids are going to be waiting for me, or, I don't want my husband to worry about me either. I want to get this in. And after that, it was a cakewalk because, everybody wants more time with their families, with their loved ones. It's like, this is perfect. It's the perfect scenario for people who still want to have lives. So that's essentially what I try to do is really hone in on, minimizing things and maximizing things depending on what they are.
Yeah, and I've noticed that, and like it's funny to me because I've gone on vacation a few times, and I told you when I started I'm going to be traveling a lot, so you always have ways for me to be able to work out regardless. And this last trip that I took, it was just a few days, and it's like 9 o'clock. We're done with our adventuring, and I'm like, okay, I'm going down to the gym. And he's like, how are you going to go train? And I'm like, I'm going to train for 28 minutes according to this workout. It's not that big of a deal, you know? Like, and you and I've talked about this a little bit. Like my partner, he didn't realize because he knew that I was going to the aerial gym, and he's like, "Oh, it's pretty, you know, it's something she does because it's pretty." And then I go to the regular gym, and it's like, "Okay, but you're there for 40 minutes at most, you know." Whereas it took until like he went back to sell his apartment in Serbia, and he came home, and I looked completely different. He's like, "Oh, okay, well, whatever." Criticisms aside, whatever seems to be working. And while we're on that, let's talk about eating more because that was another thing that got me because that functional medicine coach Christian, he had given me like calorie goal of like 1,750 calories a day, which is much more than the 1,200 that some girls try to do. And I did that for a couple of months, and then I came to you like end of April or early May, like a little panicked. Like I have been plateaued and now my weight's going up, but I have been sticking to this. Like you're like, you need to start eating more. Let's up you to 1,900 calories. And I was like, "Ugh, what do you mean?" And I was like, fuck it, you know, I'm gonna try it. And within like 2 weeks of that, the weight started plummeting, and I kept doing that for like a month, and then the weight started kept plummeting, and then you're like, okay, let's try a little bit of a calorie surplus, and I was like,
Or
a calorie surplus is how I got in this situation. But it was you know, eating a lot of random shit plus, you know, emotional stuff plus hormonal stuff. Like, when was it in like your training of people did you realize or did you always know that you just need to eat more, especially as a woman, to because there's all these studies, oh yeah, if you eat more as a woman, your cortisol is down, and so your body lets go of the fat. Which sounds counterintuitive, but it's actually how it is. Because if we're stressed out, not getting enough food, our body holds on to everything. Like, this might be the end, you know? So, like, when did you realize that, especially when it comes to women, that they need to just eat more?
yeah, it I think when I used to read the old magazines before the internet, this is dating me, of course, magazines that would tell you to eat less and run more. So they would be the ones that would try to convince you that if you got on the treadmill and did like an hour, but then ate like 12, like we were saying, 1,200 to 1,300, you're bound to lose it because it's less and less and less and more output, more output. But like you just mentioned, that is what causes your body to hold on to the last bits of things that it can, which is that fat. It's the last thing it can hold on to. So it's going to store it, not burn it. So there's a threshold for you, a threshold to meet every time, depending on your goal of where you're at hormonally, but also where you're at in your phase, including where you're at in your training. So if you're somebody who's building to a goal and you're starting off at, you know, let's just say for the sake of argument, for our sake, 1,700, and then now you're adding more activity to it. Well, the output's there, but the input isn't there yet. So now we gotta input more into you. It really is like a system, like a computer system of like what you're putting in, you're getting out. So as long as you're getting a significant amount of energy input to then use that output and expenditure in your activity, you're meeting that goal because they're meeting together at a certain point where it's going to start to click and work for you and work to your advantage. So the more output you add to it, the more calories you then have to add to your daily routine. So for the people that are, and you'll see this with any Instagram before and after of somebody who gets into bodybuilding, especially with the females, where you're looking at plates of like everything all together and they have like 28, they put like 2,800 calories on there and people are going, how are you doing that? And it's because of what they are involved in their day-to-day routine of constant cardio, right? Interval cardio several times a week, plus really heavy strenuous workouts with heavy weight. And that's going to require more than somebody who is walking, starting off just doing walking. So the person that, and trust me, I've had clients who just walked because they were at a stage in their life where they couldn't do anything else. They couldn't physically do anything else. So the calories were based on where they were at body weight wise, but not too far off from that because their activity levels were not high. They weren't doing much and they couldn't at the time. Now, for someone in your case who is doing the aerials plus the training, and then let's say we keep adding minutes to everything. Now we add minutes, that's more output. So that earns mathematically somehow more calories for you, right? 50 more here, 100 more there, because of what we're continuing to compile on top of what our baseline of where we started. So there's always somewhere to go. And that's why I always say this whole game is evolving. Like your nutrition and your training should be an evolution, because if you want to keep seeing the change, different things have to happen along the way, depending on where you're at in your stage of your life or the things that you pick up interest on that are constantly evolving. So you might as well treat it that way instead of, creating a box around everything and thinking that I'm only going to do this 1,200, 1,300 calories, but I'm going to run more and more and more and more. And then after the next week, I'm going to run more and more after that. It does signal to the body that things are going to start to get taxed. And that is what normally affects thyroid. That's the thyroid problem that we see so much. It's the overexertion, especially with women that go through this overexertion of their activity and undereating. That's why you have people downgrading, their T3, T4 to T3 so often, is because that's occurring. That's happening more and more now. So once they flip that and realize they have to go higher with their calories and rest more, but still train hard as hell for that short period of time during the day, it really will make a difference in their lives all across the board.
Yeah, that's really interesting because probably a couple months before I started talking to you, maybe a month or so before I started talking to you last year about getting started, I had just been diagnosed with endometriosis. I had like a full panel of blood tests. And the reason I went is because I had my last aerial show here locally with my coach who he's a man who does not understand women at all, and so it's very much like, oh, you're on your cycle and you have cramps, okay, everybody has to do 20 more of these things because she stopped for half a second, whereas like that's so I was like in terrible pain for like 2 weeks after that show. And then I finally went to the doctor and she's like, oh, you have endometriosis. And she did a blood test. And I'm curious now. I want to go back and I want to see, my testosterone levels were on the floor at that point, and my T3 hormones were just barely above being in that deficient range. And I'm curious as to where they would be at now, with all of that in mind. Because yeah, it's really interesting, especially because like men, like you guys have a 24-hour cycle. You can just train and eat and train and eat, and it doesn't matter. Whereas like not the same as like a woman, like if I'm in my luteal and I feel the difference in power, and it's part of why I don't take classes for aerial right now, is because when I'm in those 5 days beforehand, I'm just there stretching and doing pretty things because it's what I can manage. And yeah, that's the thing that I appreciate about you, is you do pay attention to the cycle. Like that was one of the first things you were asking me, is like, okay, where are you in your cycle right now? And then when I was able to share my app with you, you were like, ha ha ha! It's like the Google Maps, and but it does it does really make a difference. I'm curious as to at what point did you start integrating that knowledge of because most guys don't go through the thing of trying to understand a woman's cycle. Like at what point, what happened to make you realize that that's something that you really needed to take a lot of care when it comes to your women clients?
Yeah, that happened, I think, probably right around, I want to say 2020 or 2021. when I started working with a client who was a flight attendant, and she was doing a lot of traveling for her. So she had the same type of thing that you had, which was, okay, how do I maximize this, because I'm going to be traveling a lot. If I have to stay overnight at a hotel and they have a hotel, I got this. Okay, we figured that out. We have hotel workouts. Okay, how's my eating? And then when she started to read, and I forget who the author was off the top of my head, but it was somebody who, I think they're pretty popular now, gaining popularity now because of, I don't know if they were the first one to notice this, but, and I think this is something that's been around for a while, but it was eating and training around your cycle, a book that was like a manual almost. So she started reading and it was like, oh, this looks very familiar, because somebody had told her about it. And when we started to implement some of these same things that the person in the book was doing, but then tweaking it to her type of eating that she was doing at the time and her schedule, we were able to maximize her energy during that time period of, hey, if there's heavy travel going on, but she's in the right cycle where she could push, then okay, now we can change up the training and the eating according to that. But then when you're resting and she's off the road or off the sky, and she's, resting a lot, recovering, now we can maximize that with the right amount of recovery and eating and stretching at your house, because it calls for that. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, well, this has to be across the board, especially for anybody who isn't menopausal. So let's try that. Let's try that with the next person. And then it worked for the next person. But everybody's was different because of their goals and what type of training they were doing in that moment. And then for the women that are in menopause, it's, hey, guess what? Like, strength training is going to work for you very well, right? Because it's balancing out those hormones again. So anybody who's in their 50s who is menopausal, who and even premenopausal, they are learning that strength training is turning something, a switch on that most people hadn't accounted for years ago. And that's why more women are getting into it, which I love, because we want to see more doing that kind of stuff. And it used to be dominated by men, that whole sport of powerlifting. And now you're seeing so many. So they're realizing the benefits aside from the feeling of the glory of lifting heavy weight. They're seeing everything that comes with it. And it's changing their quality of life completely. So knowing that there were two different ways to manage these things for menopausal and people that weren't even close to menopause, there's a lot to be done there to, again, like I say, maximize and minimize wherever you were needing to do it. That's what needed to happen for these women that were looking to sort of hack everything and feel like they needed to find the needle in the haystack. And sometimes it's a certain type of training, sometimes it's a certain amount of nutrition, or it's a both, or it's a particular way to work around your cycle, and they find it and it clicks. That's the best part, is seeing how happy they are when they make those changes. Like, that's what gets me. Like, when I really think deeply about it, and I usually get pretty emotional about it, because it's something that feels so rewarding for me, as because I'm seeing their happiness with it and their confidence come back. There's nothing really like it. There really isn't, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, for me, that's been a big thing is because I essentially quit birth control at 30 and then everything went crazy. The endometriosis flared up. I started gaining weight for the first time in my life ever. And I was like, I felt like I had zero control over my body. And then when I was training, because of the way I was training before, I was ending up like, because that coach, like, he's good for like young people and for kids and stuff. But for me, if you stretch me, literally stretch me too far at the wrong point in my cycle, I will feel the tear internally and then I'll have cramps for a week, you know? And that's completely unsustainable. And I was really when by the time I was still like on the road and I was just like I stepped on the scale, I realized that my BMI had kissed overweight and I was like, Greg, we need to get started yesterday. This is bullshit. You know, I felt completely out of control. And there were points where like I've had points where I'm like, is this even worth it? You know, like, is it gonna happen? Because we're all just told women after they get to a certain age, they're just gonna, you know, fall apart. Like, is this even worth it? But now, and I tell my partner this a lot, like, I know I have a system now. All I have to do is continue to lift weights, continue to train aerial, both of which, lucky for me, I love. Because I told you about that. We had had a conversation. He's like, well, you know, we don't like to work out, but we have to do what we have to do for our bodies. And I'm like, fucking speak for yourself. Like, I don't agree with that. But, yeah, I can see where that would be super rewarding in that, especially with women, like, especially like postpartum women, like you've been making great grounds with Bexley Farnsworth, for example. When you have three children and you're told by society that women have children, get fat, and then they just stay fat because that's what postpartum is, and that's just your reality, like that is super defeating, right? Or me like taking a few months off of aerial traveling last year and then getting back onto it and having to start from zero. I was just like, I was so angry, right? But I'm glad now that even when I'm traveling, I can lift weights, I can maintain the strength that I've built, you know, and so I do want to express gratitude for that because I know that I was like, wait one more week for like 3 months,
Of
but
course.
my only regret for anybody watching this is I wish I would have just started because I might already be to my goal by now, you know, and I'm not far off from it. So thank you because now I know I have a system, you know, and I've got another, I think, year banked up with you and we'll see. I might move the goalpost further or I might hit that and be happy, you know, and it's good to know that I have support. You're really flexible when it comes to, you know, payments and schedules and timing, and you've been very fair with me as to what it costs, and I really appreciate that because I'm not rich over here. And I also know that like I really like is even when it's buggy, like yesterday, not recording my workout, like fuck you, you know, silly app. But the workouts, that bank of workouts within that app is so helpful. And it's cool that, you know, when I do decide to try to fly solo, I'm not going to be completely solo because I'll have those years of records and everything. So we've talked about in a sort of way like what the best part of the job is. What is the hardest thing about what you do? What is the most challenging thing?
Think it's helping people manage expectations of how long it's going to take.
Hmm.
That's been the hardest part for me because I think we're still thinking that things could happen. We could meet goals in 30 days. And I think that's advertised a lot. So we assume that it's going to happen for everyone because
Yeah,
we
you
see the
see the like before and after AI. This took me
airbrush.
6 weeks. It's like, no,
Yeah,
it didn't.
right, right. And it's like now it's there was airbrush before and you could like create your abs through like Adobe. But the thing about it is the managing of that is understanding that this I always constantly say it's the marathon, not the race, but I learned that myself in powerlifting because I saw the people burning out in the sport and then I saw the people that lasted. My problem was I got started too late and then went way too heavy, way too fast, thus creating that learning experience of what I should have done was start way back in the 90s and done it the way it was supposed to be done, slow, right? Almost like a slow cooker. But because I was managing that at the time, I learned myself through my own training, like the 17 or 18 years of actually doing it the way I started to understand training because, maybe 23 years of doing it, but 18 years of really understanding it. I realized how long that took to get to where I am now. With this size and physique, took a long time to build, but people that see that and go, oh, I think I can do that in, a couple of years. It's going to take a lot longer, but I think for a lot of people, the expectation of the end result is really tough too, because some people think it's too far off, right? There are others that will say, I'm never going to get there, right? And they do. I've had people that I've worked with who were 600 pounds and now they're 320 pounds. They knew that it was going to take some time, but their mindset was, I don't think this will ever happen for me, right? So managing the expectations of the timetable, I think, has been the hardest part of this.
Yeah, that was something I kind of struggled with a bit too, because spending my whole life like pretty skinny and then all of a sudden ending up overweight, I was like, I need this to happen like right now. And then when we're in a world of GLP-1s, like I don't necessarily hate on those, especially because there are a lot of people with PCOS and endo that are getting inflammatory relief from using those medications, but they come with a lot of side effects. I'm curious as to how many people come to you wanting to incorporate those. Is that a common thing that you're seeing in your practice recently in terms of the
Yeah,
spike of GLP-1s?
that's what's crazy. Nobody that has been on it has come to me, because I think it's been more of a case study of they feel like they can solve it that way, and be the hare, not the tortoise, and they feel like that's the end goal. They feel like that's what's going to get them there. But the more we see, it affect people with muscle loss, the more we're going to realize that it should just be for that person who is severely overweight and obese, who has those same type of problems you were talking about, but also it's got to be a short-term thing that's done in very low doses over a long period of time.
Mhm.
Once you get to doses that are really, really, above the average, that's when people start to have issues. And it's just the same as, people that do the liposuction, or the old stuff they used to do with surgeries for weight loss. Everybody ends up having some kind of problem in the end with it. Um, and so the more that people come to me, they're more of the type that, at least in our community, that have said, I don't want to do that. I want to swear it off because I don't think it will help me, but whatever I'm doing now isn't working. Can you help me? I feel like that's going to happen more and more upcoming, because GLP-1s are just becoming more common. So I think that's going to be something in the future that will be the case, I think, where people will try to use it and realize that they're losing things at the same time of, after losing all that weight, that they're losing a lot of muscle, and how to gain that back would be something that would have to be done. Plus, there are alternatives to that kind of thing, as far as supplements that are weight loss. Like they're friendly to the system, even though they do the job. They don't do the same job, because GLPs are an extreme case. But things like green coffee extract and
I
I
think
can never say it.
berberine, right? Berberine.
Berberine and glucotamine. I think that's the way you say it. There's a couple of that sound like glucosamine and glutamine that I always get confused with. 3 little batches of things you can take that help with that are much, 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 much safer. Um, Chinese herbs, all things you can incorporate that are safer for the body long term, and they're going to eventually come out with safer supplements in the future that will not have so many issues, and will be more of a slow burn for you, because I know what direction we're going, and people are wanting the faster results. for whatever reason. I don't know, but um, I'm sure that eventually there will be some advances to where you'll have things come onto the market that will, at the start, people will hesitate about, but will eventually be used in moderation, but a lot safer than what we're getting with the GLP-1s. Um, and what I'm thinking about off the top of my head, it's not been advertised yet, but there's going to be some coming out soon that have that same effect, but don't have the side effects. Those are going to be attractive. But at the same time, with all this comes the muscle loss, and that's where the problems start. Um,
From
at
my
least on a
understanding, GLP-1s are naturally produced by the body, and when inflammation is high, the body doesn't produce as much, which is what leads to the insulin resistance. And like, because I've done a lot of research into these things because I find this stuff fascinating. I also have a few friends that are on GLP-1s with varying results, like the one that's focusing on weight training and eating a lot and eating right and protein. She's having very good results and not very much muscle loss. And then I have another friend who's a very busy mom, and she's dealing with joint issues, wondering if she has hyperehlers-Danlos syndrome because her tendons don't feel very strong, right? And so it's really interesting. I'm not judgmental of people that use them, but I do know for me personally, even though they do work well with some of the things that I deal with, I'm like, how do I just stimulate my body to do this so I don't have to depend on some medication, right? And I suspect that's a big part of why weight training works for women over something like just huge amounts of cardio, is it probably stimulates that hormone to be produced by the body.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the key to it is the more we put into the weight training, the free weights especially, the bigger change that's going to make. Somehow it does something completely different to the metabolism and the body than anything else does.
Yeah, it like flips a switch and everything kind of functions differently and you move differently, like you look completely differently. Which yeah, that's they talk about non-scale victories and stuff, but those do really matter because you might weigh the same but be look completely different because you are comprised of different things than you were before. Um, my last question is really well, I have two questions actually. My second to last question is how common is eating disorders in your clients, and how do you combat that, like, because I've dealt with the binge and restrict thing, but how common is eating disorders when it comes to people think that people who are overweight and wanting help don't have those sorts of disorders, but often it's kind of the opposite. I'm curious as to your experience with that.
Yeah, very few, maybe one or two from the early days of working with them, um, especially with the women. I think it kind of tagged along with what we were talking about with the underserving of what your body needed. There were people that I was working with that were eating only 800 calories, and everything they were eating was like salt free, so everything was very bland. It was like that, fish, broccoli, and chicken diet that bodybuilders get on for uber restriction. And when it comes to just sucking as much water out of your body as possible, uh, that was something that we had to combat for a very long time. At least it took like at least like 6 to 8 months to dial in enough of a change in the um just I think just in the whole philosophy behind eating better. And we went from 800 incrementally finally up to 1850, and it took that long, right? Like it actually took that long to do. And so with that being said, I think that managing the expectation at the start of, hey, we don't have to tear the band-aid off, and if you have an eating disorder, I'm not going to pile on calorie after calorie on you. I'm not going to make you jump up to immediately to 1500 because this is what you've done for the past 5-10 years of your life. So psychologically, how do we manage expectations with how much you're actually taking in? Because your whole idea behind more is a sore spot. It's a traumatic response. And those 8 months were probably the hardest I've worked with somebody in a long time, because we were talking every single day, and a lot of it was mental. And then you had to accept the fact that, what if I eat this, what's going to happen? How, and again, that's why journals are so important. I think the food journals are incredible. How they make you feel when you eat them. I think they're effective. That's what we ended up doing for the majority of the training. And the time that I had with her was, what are the things you're feeling after you ate that? And the next time you eat it, is that going to be the same feeling, the same thing you're thinking about the next time you eat it? Is that a common thread? There were a lot of things that we had to go through psychologically to sort of manage that. And I'm glad that we got there, but that's hard, and it takes a long time for someone that's had that built into their psyche for so incredibly long. But I'm just grateful that those things have changed for those people that were going through, and then maybe they still struggle to a degree. I don't know if it's a thing that still goes on for them. I try to check in as much as possible, but what I'm more happy about is that we got the hardest parts out of the way of the disorder itself. Now it's okay. What's the next step? Right. And checking in with them is important, because I still check in on people I haven't worked with just to see how they're doing. Those are the people that probably come the longest way, minus the people that were 600 pounds. It's a long-term thing that has to be managed psychologically too. It's not just a physical thing, obviously. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing that I've had to work through. And for me, it's mostly just because of the malnutrition I had as a child, there's that like deep internal fear of lack. And if I feel in scarcity, then I suffer, right? Um, and yeah, I mean, I do think that the world is going a better way. There's a lot of these like intuitive food coaches, and I do appreciate what they do, because they really are kind of real, like, and this is a problem with the vegan community, it's a problem with vegetarian, it's a problem with carnivore and keto, is we got to stop demonizing certain foods, like maybe they should make up most of your diet, but they're also not evil, they're food. That's just what it is, right? Um, and that is something that I found to be super rewarding, and for longevity, like when you're doing extreme diets and stuff, you kind of lose the oomph for everything else, which makes it so these things don't last, right? um, I want to switch gears a little bit. I have one big question, and then I have one kind of silly question. The big question is, especially in the recent months, with discussions about, proper ways to present masculinity in this world. You have a son. How do you, how are you teaching your son healthy masculinity, as opposed to this like machista, you know, I'm a man, I do what I want, womanizing bullshit that kind of took the world by storm and is rampant, as you know, in a lot of parts of our community. How do you combat that and teach your son actual healthy masculine behavior?
Was a big thing for me, especially a couple years back, because of that influence that those men were having on his age group, because that Gen Alpha age group is in that prime age right now of 13, 14, 15, that is hearing different things go in and out of their ear hole. And they're seeing that is getting rewarded somehow, right?
Mhm.
In society somehow, either with material things. And if you're after that, it's going to feed that. with that sort of the toxic side that we talk about. And what I always tell my son is follow the people that you see the opposite sex act very comfortable around. If you see that that person is calm around that man, that's a sign. If they're not tense, if they're not constantly like they're being led around, by the nose, and you see the way other women react around that person, especially when it's, let's say it's one of your coaches, let's say it's, a teacher, or, and I use me as an example. I'm like, you've watched me over the years, what do you think about the way I go about my day and about my energy and how I am around people and especially women? And he's like, well, that's the thing, is like, I'm seeing that, but I'm getting this. And I'm like, yeah, the internet is telling you that. The internet is telling you that's getting rewarded because that is its own psyop itself. That's the thing that's telling you that you're going to get all these material possessions, all this wealth while treating women this way. They don't go hand in hand. Successful people don't have to act like an asshole to become successful. If this is your thing, if you're really trying to go for finance or whatever you want to do with your life, there is a certain way to conduct yourself in this world that catches more honey, right? I mean, you draw more honey that way. And whenever I have those sit down talks with him, it's always to remind him of, I go back to the name. I like the Papanicolas name. It's fucking important. Like bring it back to the name and the people that came before me, like my dad, your grandfather, they were highly respected people, and they're Greek. Like, don't piss them off. It's the kind of like, don't piss off your elders that I try to hone in on, because they built this for you. Like, all this trickled down. So listening to some other guy you have no connection to whatsoever, just because he was told to say something in a video, which most of the time it is not their original thought. It's something they're probably being paid to say, or it is, and they're controlled anyway.
Or they're fatherless. That's a big thing, is like,
yeah, can't
my
forget that.
my
So,
ex, John, that was really the biggest wound that he had, and we were in an abusive relationship, as you said, being led by the nose. That was me. But I knew the whole time, his father killed himself 3 days before his first birthday. He never had a father, and then he had an asshole of a stepfather who was abusive, right? You really, that just having the father, and I often say the reason why I'm not totally fucking screwed up on the streets and stuff is because I had a saint of a dad. You saw the photos I sent you a few nights ago of me with him in his cars. He was the best possible dad I think I personally could have had. So that like family thread of that healthy masculinity and good fatherhood, it plays a role. And I notice in a lot of these people that are really unhealthy, these same people really, they lack that proper masculine influence. And I think that's inspiring, because they're all just thought, okay, you just have to be stronger, you have to fuck as many women as possible, and women don't matter, they're just this or that, make me a sandwich, all this bullshit. Um, Whereas, yeah, it's really kind of the opposite, where, they say happy wife, happy life. And these guys are like, oh, you're a simp. No, you're not a simp if you actually like who you're with. That doesn't make you a simp. Um, and so the last question I have for you is, who is Vince Bartoli?
I didn't know this was coming, but that's great.
I
Oh
had
my
to
God.
ask.
That's awesome. So, the story was originally that when they were calling in the, I can't believe I'm saying this, in the papers, or I think it was an advertisement somewhere, but it was a physical thing, a physical advertisement of trying to find local bodybuilders to be in the Wonder Woman 1984 movie. When I saw that, I was like, oh, snap, I'm going to try that. I'm going to get involved in that and actually see if I can like be in the movie. Uh, so, and I was already doing all the heavy lifting and all that. I was like, I think I can swing that. So I sent in like all these random pictures of just like I'd shaved into the stash, the 80s bodybuilder, did the stringer, found the clothes. My sister is a big sort of hoarder of vintage clothes. So she found all this stuff for me to wear for like the photo shoot that I was going to send in. Well, ultimately I didn't get the extra position, right, for the bodybuilder. And I watched the movie and was like, gosh, Jesus, these guys are, you see them, you're like, what? They're not even, they don't even look like bodybuilders. Uh, but so when I thought about it after getting kind of denied on that, I was like, why don't I just make my own movie or just make my own character? Because I already bought all the clothes anyway. And I love the idea of the creative outlet for a person because I think that's so important. And we can always circle back to that another time. But like the idea was I was going to create this out of touch 80s bodybuilder who was cryogenically frozen, thawed out in the modern era, and he doesn't recognize a damn thing. He's pissed off at the world. He's confused, and he's from Long Island. He's Italian. And when I started making the videos, I was like, I got to make him funny, but I have to make him serious too. So I would do these funny vignettes, but then I would create the dramatic sort of short films with somebody who was a boyfriend of my sister at the time, who was a very creative guy who did all the shooting and all the helped me with the story. You know, put some stuff out. Everybody in the community loved it, and so I'm kind of rebooting him a little bit because he kind of took a break for a little while. And the idea is he's going to open up. Well, he's going to reopen his gym that's been dusty and unused for a while. And so it's going to be a lot of banter between me and my son, who's going to be the Gen Z, Gen Alpha meets the Gen X. Just a bunch of conflict with that and hilarious shit. So that's the whole story behind Vince. Was he was a creation that was based off somebody my dad used to see all the time at his gym in Long Island. These Italian guys who were just over the top, nuts, crazy guys with their muscle cars hanging out at my dad's gym in Long Island. And from the stories he told me, I was like, I have to create something from that because it's too good. So,
Yeah, one thing I learned about you a couple of months ago, you shared an old video of you doing impressions of people. But they're really, really realistic. And I was just like, oh damn. And I partially asked that question in a way because I don't know if you read Atlas Shrugged, but the whole thing in Atlas Shrugged is who is John Galt? Who
yeah,
is John Galt? And like Vince almost seems like the 80s power lifter version of John Galt, like this mythical creature that he's got his standards, he's got his, his plan, and this world that he lives in just isn't it. And I think it's super creative. I think it's super
yeah.
cool.
Thank you.
Um,
I,
yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the other parts. The little clip you sent me the other night, I was kind of rolling about it. I was like, this is great. This is iconic. Because I think especially in this movement, there's this emphasis on being like, I have to be serious. I have to, be philosophically obsessed. And like, I am a big person where we are out of the talking heads era of anarchy and we're into the people that are actually trying to live it in their daily lives. Like, how are you living your life? How are you doing business? Who are you doing business with? How do you treat your customers? How do you treat your family? How do you treat your wife? All of these things matter more to me than what some guy says on stage. And
yeah, yeah,
I think that's part of why you and I gel really well. We're coming up on an hour and a half, and I want to say thank you for taking the time twice because
yeah.
it took us an hour of trying last week, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm glad we got this to work, and I definitely want to do another episode in the future because there's so much more to talk about, especially as I get more into this stuff and I'm learning a lot more. And you're also getting into Chinese medicine and all of that, like that all matters in terms of like it's not simply just about lifting heavy things and eating a lot of protein. So, Greg, thank you so much for your time.
Honored. Thank you for this. This was wonderful. Couldn't wait for it.
Looking forward to the next conversation.
Yeah, me too.